Hi everyone, it's Darius Bucher, owner of Integral Forest Management and the Canadian rep for Reforestation Technologies International, the makers of Teabag Fertilizer. And I just wanted to come out in the field today, and I know a lot of people are struggling with establishing dry sites. And the whole objective of this video is to try and help you and give you some things that you can do, some tools that you can use, some things to think about and to consider when you are trying to establish trees on dry sites so that you too can be successful. So I'm just going to go for a walk on a couple of stands and just show you some things to think about. Okay, so one of the blocks that I am going to be looking at with you today is located in the IDF DK204 site series. We're looking at about 1,100 to 1,200 meters elevation. As you can see around me, I'll just do a little bit of a panorama. This site had been burned in 2021, I should say. And since that time, it's been salvage harvested and also mounded as far as site prep is concerned. Now, as far as establishing trees on a site like this, many times people come in after a burn and they look at it and it just looks like a ballpark. There is no competing vegetation. There's lots of exposed microsites. I mean, it just looks easy. It looks like a real cakewalk. The reality of it is that is very short-lived. That does not happen for a very long period of time. It does not take more than a year or two, and all that brush that's been hiding as root systems or seeds in the soil explodes. And you can see just from looking in behind me, you can see the kind of competition that you can have. And here in the IDF on these dry sites, and I'm on a south aspect right now, most of your competition is not above the ground. It's below the ground. These plants are competing for soil moisture with your trees. And they have root systems that are far more effective, far more vigorous, and far more spread into the soil than your seedlings are. So in order for your seedling to establish, it has to be able to outcompete these things. So at any rate, what I want to try and teach you today is how to get your tree connected to the site. So as far as this seedling is concerned, if I am going to be successful in establishing a seedling like this, I need to get it connected to the site. So as you can see here, and I know this seedling's already grown for this season, but when this seedling is planted, immediately after it's planted, all that it has to draw from are what's in the plug. It's limited to what's that for soil moisture and nutrients, and some nutrients which would be found in the foliage that was established last year in the nursery, and those do not last very long as it starts to extend its leader. So why is it important that it gets connected to site, and what do I mean when I say that? Essentially what it means is we need to get those roots extended out into the soil as quickly as possible before the summer drought hits. If the roots are not connected into the soil, if they're not tapped into the soil, then that seedling has no ability to get moisture and nutrients into the crown. Why is that important? Everything happens in the crown as far as photosynthesis is concerned. Trees are about sequestering carbon. They're about producing sugars. That's what they want to do. So when we get this root system established and we can get it moisture and nutrients as quickly as possible through the root system being able to fan out and access the site resources that are there, then it's able to feed the crown. This is important because the crown is the most nutrient demanding part of the seedling. So it needs lots of nutrients in order to extend itself, in order to grow, in order to set up for the following growing season. It also needs that moisture to keep turgor pressure so that it can continue to extend its leader in the spring. And also that moisture is extremely important for photosynthesis. Now, seedlings are like a feedback loop. Moisture and nutrients come up from the soil into the crown. The crown takes them, utilizes them to grow, and of course photosynthesizes it, and roots respire. So they cannot make food on their own. They need sugar coming from the crown in order to survive, in order to grow and to extend. Now, we all want big root systems. So just think about this. Part of the key to getting a good root system and getting it established on site is to have a decent sized crown that is photosynthesizing and sending sugars down to those respiring roots. So let's talk about getting those roots established. And let's talk about, once again, the seedling being able to capture the site, get connected to the site so it can start drawing site resources as quickly as possible and getting it into that crown and getting that feedback loop started so that it can grow and establish and flourish. Now, when you come onto any of these IDF sites, what you commonly find is a lot of grass competition. And this grass competition is a serious problem because, like I said, it can to some degree block out some sunlight, but the major problem is its ability to take up moisture and to rob it from your seedling. Not only that, it can also be a real pig for nutrients. Something extremely too important to remember about grass is that what you see on top is nothing compared to what's going on down below. You can end up with 3 times the amount of root system, this hairy, fibrous root system pulling moisture from the soil that you don't see, that is far larger than the crown of the grass itself. So let's just dig some up and I can show you what I'm talking about. Now, I probably cut a lot of this off, of course, pulling it out of the ground. But you can see, if I shake this off, how hairy and fibrous that root system is and what a mat it can form. Now, if I was to plant a seedling straight into that, how much soil moisture do you think it's going to get? Especially during the back end of the summer where things really tend to dry out. So if we are going to be able to get that seedling connected to the site, we have to get rid of and eliminate the vegetation that is going to be competing for moisture. So one of the ways that we do that, of course, is through site prep. I'll just give you an example over here. So what has been done on this site is to mound. So mounding does a lot for us on this particular site in the sense that when you come and take a look, you see the scrape that I'm standing in, there's no competing vegetation within this area. Or what is there is just such a tiny amount that it's not going to have a major impact on soil moisture for your seedling. The second thing that it does, and people often forget this, especially when they're raw planting, is that when you're planting a seedling in the ground, a lot of times the soils in this type of site are very dense. They're very hard, especially in the summertime as they tend to dry out. They can become as hard as concrete. Success for your seedling means being able to extend its roots out into the soil. And we're not just talking the big roots that we're digging up, but the fine roots that are less than 2 millimeters that are penetrating into the soil. That's where the action happens. That's where the nutrient exchange, as well as the moisture is taken up on those surface area of your fine roots. So having looser soils is very important because that allows your roots to penetrate and get access to the site quicker. But the other thing that loosening the soil does, which is really important as well, you can see maybe a little bit from my shovel, it's not too hard to get my shovel into this, is when rain does fall and those thunderstorms do come around, you want absolutely every single drop you can possibly get because you don't know when you're going to get the next one. It allows moisture to penetrate. So it makes the rainfall that you do get effective. If you have hard-baked, hard soils that your trees are trying to grow into, even if it rains, maybe they penetrate like a millimeter and the rest of it just completely runs off. So those are three important things to think about. There's a fourth thing, though, that mounding also does. Remember, I'm on a south aspect. We're on aspects that are going to be like 40 degrees, something like that. You know, and some of these temperatures can even happen in May when they're trying to extend their leaders. Is that when the seedling, and just come up here and take a look at this one. A lodgepole pine seedling that you can see. When it's placed towards the bottom of the hole of the mound, the side of the mound, and even the mound itself, if you got the orientation just right, and the orientation that you really want is thinking about where is my sun going to be in the late afternoon, like 2 to 4 o'clock when it's really super hot. It provides shading, and shading is extremely important in order to be able to manage moisture deficit, vapor pressure deficit, especially which is that your atmospheric drought, so that your trees don't desiccate when it does get hot and dry. And the last thing that the mound does, as you get towards the bottom of it, of course, any moisture that you get in the wintertime through snow, or you do get that heavy rain, it drops down to the bottom of that mound or that hole. It sits there, penetrates into the soil longer. I have seen from my trials, and I have one trial site where it was just stumped, but the impact of having that extra moisture in the spring as a result of that depression was lasting. And like 15 years later, we're still seeing differences between treatment and control trees, which were prepped versus unprepped. So being able to collect that moisture makes a very big difference. Something also to be cognizant of when you're thinking about how hot and how dry a site can be is the vegetation that you find on it. The fact that I'm seeing this, I think what I refer to as rabbit brush, which is a sagebrush-like shrub, that I'm seeing it on this type of a site, on this south aspect, tells me that things can get pretty warm and dry given the climate that it likes to live in. So it goes to tell me how important shading is in the afternoon, because if these are the types of plants that are able to establish on this site, then your trees are definitely going to be under pressure from atmospheric drought to be able to establish. Just another indicator of how hot and dry these sites can get and the vapor pressure deficits that you can be under in the summertime is the presence of balsam root. I mean, this is a flowering plant that tends to grow in grassy areas, south aspects, you know, not even within timbered areas. So when you're starting to see plants like this grow up and they're pretty happy, definitely tells you that things can get pretty hot and dry in the summertime around here. Okay, now let's look at some trees. And I want to show you some trees that are apps that got connected to the site properly as a result of the site prep that we were able to do. So here we go. Just come and take a look right down here. So in this case, it's a lodgepole pine. You take a look at the mound itself and the layer of duff that it pulled up when the excavator was creating it. And this is pointing towards the south. So it's giving me a good degree of shading during the hot afternoon sun. What's showing me that this seedling is getting connected to the site and it's getting the moisture and the nutrients that it needs. Of course, the biggest thing that I'm looking at, I'm getting full extension of my leader that was grown at the nursery or predetermined in the bud. But the other thing that I'm seeing is needle length. And you know that you don't get full needle length out of a lodgepole pine unless it's getting access to moisture. This tree had enough shading. The vapor pressure deficit was within the zone. It could totally handle it. And it was getting moisture and nutrients from the soil. Now, note the color of this seedling. Now, the nutrients that it's getting didn't just happen by accident. It was also fertilized at the time of planting with RTI Teabag Fertilizer, the Chilcotin-pak. Now, one of the things to consider about these dry sites, and this is where the importance of fertilization comes in at the time of planting. People wonder why you would do a dry site. The reason is, again, as I was saying, this crown is the most nutrient demanding part of the tree. We want to get this crown going as quickly as possible. We want it to have an extensive crown. The larger the crown, the bigger the photosynthetic area. The bigger the photosynthetic area, the more sugar is created, the more sugar that can be sent down to the roots. In order to create fine roots, in order for the roots to respire and to live, they need photosynthate. They need sugar. They need food. The more food that can be sent, the more ability the tree has to make a bigger root system. The bigger root system that the tree has, of course, means the more moisture, the more nutrients that it can pull from the soil as it's accessing the site, that it can send up to the crown, which of course will create a bigger crown, which can also lead to a bigger root system. And you can see the positive feedback loop that is started as a result of not only putting the seedling in a proper microsite where it can flourish, but combining that with fertilizing at the time of planting. We talk a lot about in forestry circles in BC about resilience. Resilience starts at the time of planting, and the more connected a seedling is to the site, and the better nutrition that it has, the better access to moisture that it has, with a bigger crown and bigger root system, the more resilient it's going to be if some stressful event should come along in its future. Okay, I know many of you are probably watching that last segment of the video, and I'm talking about the shading of the mounds. And then when you take a look at the seedlings, they're standing in the sun. And I was looking at that as well. I was also thinking about a number of other seedlings that I had seen on the site, and they're in the sun as well. And I was pondering and I was wondering, exactly what benefit that shading was doing for those seedlings. I think the thing that is really important to remember is the objective ultimately of site prep, the mounds in this particular situation, is to create conditions such that the vapor pressure deficit is low enough, long enough into the growing season that the Douglas fir is able to extend its leader and it's not going to desiccate. It's going to be able to harden itself off and be ready for the summer heat. That's our objective. Now, when it comes to trees desiccating, there's more than just solar radiation to consider. We'll talk about solar radiation in this extent that we're looking at fully grown one-year-old trees. I was not there on site during the spring, during the summer, to see what level of shading those trees had at that particular time of year. Their leaders weren't fully extended. So yes, and depending on the different mounds where the tree was able to be planted are going to depend on the degree of blocking of the sunlight and shading that trees are going to get from that. So there is some benefit to that. And it's going to depend how close they can tuck it up and how steep the mound is, that kind of thing. But the other thing the mound is doing, there's more than just transpiration, things that cause transpiration loss, than just sunlight. The other thing to consider is the wind. Now, when you were listening to the video and earlier on, you were probably noticing that was quite a bit of wind noise trying to in the background as I was talking. That was just a gentle breeze just as I'm walking on the site. But it got me thinking, well, how much wind is there during the whole season? And what if those winds were happening when it was like 30 degrees outside and the soils are dry? That could be extremely desiccating to your seedling. If we're taking a seedling and we're shifting it down lower into the hole, we are actually putting it into a boundary layer of still air where the wind is not able to desiccate it, or at least not desiccate it as easily. The other thing that the mound is doing is it's not just providing shading to the seedling potentially, but more importantly the soil. It is keeping that soil moist longer into the growing season, and of course a seedling's ability to be able to handle transpiration loss or vapor pressure deficits that are negative, that could cause mortality, is its ability to pull moisture from the soil. So the longer it has moisture into the soil and the easier that it is to access it, and it also is able to access it a lot easier because the soil is loose and it's able to get its roots out, that is also a benefit to the seedling, and so the mound is providing that as well. But the other thing is that bit of shading around that seedling is also, when you have moist soils, your humidity is up, so your vapor pressure deficit is much lower. Not only that, that mound does create some shading in the area around the tree, and we're just thinking about, what if you had planted those seedlings into a scalp that was just dead flat? You can only imagine what the radiation would be onto that scalp, and then pouring that sunlight and that heat back onto your seedling. So it's reducing the ability of the sun to do that. So there's a whole lot going on here. When we're seeing desiccated trees, we do know one thing for sure: they desiccated. What was the combination of all those different factors that could have caused the desiccation? You'd have to pull apart each microsite, stand there in the summer, and to find out what was going on. But the bottom line is, we want to focus on what our target is, and that is doing the best that we can to create conditions where the vapor pressure deficit is low enough, long enough into the growing season, that the Douglas fir can extend its leader and its needles without desiccating. Okay, so I thought now that we've talked about what we're trying to accomplish, let's take a look at a few of the trees on the site and just see what I mean about seedlings and what they look like when they get fully connected to a site. Nice lodgepole pine. It's beautiful. There's another one all set up for the next year. There's a Douglas fir. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later on in the video, and about establishing Douglas fir especially. Another pine tree. You can just see how nice it is, how fully extended the needles are, totally connected to the site, had everything it needed to get going. Look at this pine as well, same kind of an idea. Just beautiful trees when you give them everything they need to get established. Just a few more trees, and I wanted to show you the potential of them. So, starting with this Douglas fir, once again shaded to the south of the afternoon sun, just looking great. It's fully established. It's just going to rock it next year. But I also wanted to show you some larch, because they put some larch on this site as well, and it just looks awesome. Really off to the races. It's just looking just amazing. So maybe come in a bit closer. Larch can always be a little bit difficult to see. Just another one up here. So once again, just a bit of the potential. You give the tree the right microsite so it has access to moisture and nutrients. Because it's limited to the plug when it's first planted at the time of planting, you fertilize it with RTI Teabag Fertilizer. It's off to the races. This tree's never going to look back, and you're going to be fine. It's going to turn into a crop tree, no problem. Okay, so the area where I'm at, this was really quite helpful in the fact that the block that is adjacent was also planted this spring, but it was not site prepared, and it was not fertilized at the time of planting. It was planted with lodgepole pine. And I just thought I'd show you what these trees look like in comparison to the ones that we were looking at earlier in the site prep ground that had been fertilized at the time of planting. Once again, thinking about connection to site, thinking about soil moisture, just going into a review, the size of your crown, the needle length of your crown is going to be dependent upon how well those roots establish and how quickly they can start pulling moisture and nutrients from the site and getting it into the crown. Without proper moisture, without proper nutrition, it is not going to expand the way that it was designed to. Once again, that means it's not able to send as many carbohydrates or sugars down to the roots for respiration and for production of your fine root system that's going to further expand the seedling's ability to collect moisture and nutrients and get that positive feedback loop going. So let's just take a look we're talking about site connectivity. These seedlings in the raw planted ground, they all survived. I wasn't seeing mortality, but they certainly look a lot different. So if you just come in close here, here's one of the seedlings competing with the grass that I was showing you earlier. Very bottle brushed, not much of a crown at all. Color's not that great. Very small bud for next year. So you just think about this seedling in the context of resilience. A further drought happens. So many times in IDF sites, they start out with decent survival, and then as time gets going on, they get closer and closer to free growing. By the time they get to free growing, so many trees have dropped out because of drought, deer, other factors that are pressuring the seedling and causing it to be stressed to the point of mortality, that you don't end up with much stalking. So you're wanting to have a full stand all the time. In order to get that, to get the resilience that you're looking for, you got to establish a healthy tree. So let's just dig this one up and see what it looks like underground. So to help put things in context, I brought my fertilized tree in a proper microsite from the other site. And I don't know, you might be able to see a bit of a difference between the two. But thinking again into the future, which one's going to be able to perform, which is going to get you to crop rotation sooner. But not only that, it's just not a matter of growing faster, it's also being strong and resilient to resist the environmental pressures that are against a seedling, especially future drought. So being able to give the seedling everything it wants to be able to get established at the beginning is critical to its success and the success of your plantation. Well, thanks again, everyone, for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. It was a challenging video for me to do, to be quite honest with you, because when we're describing the establishment of trees, there are just so many things going on a site, so many limiting factors to look at. I really hope that when I went over this site, went over the seedlings that I did, that I was able to cover all the ground and identify everything that could be either helping or hindering the seedlings. But once again, if you're going to have success on these sites, or any site for that matter, the key is to get the seedling connected to the site and to get the roots established as quickly and as fast as possible, to get that crown going as quickly as fast as possible, to start that feedback loop so that that tree is performing to the potential, the full potential, that is, of its genetics. These sites are very difficult to establish if you get behind. The competing vegetation is absolutely brutal. It's relentless in its drive for moisture. It will take absolutely everything from your seedlings if you get behind it. It's just not a matter of survival during the first year that counts on these types of sites. You want that tree to perform, and not only that, if you get it to perform, you don't have to worry about survival. It will survive. Getting it to perform so that it can overcome that competing vegetation and the other environmental stresses is key to being successful. It absolutely can be done by addressing the limiting factors that are on your site. So, keys again, of course, dealing with competing vegetation before you even plant the seedlings by doing proper site prep. Here they did mounding. I'm not saying that mounding needs to be done absolutely everywhere. I gave you the keys of what the mounding was accomplishing: providing moisture, providing protection from the sun so that it's properly shaded from vapor pressure deficit, giving loose soils so that roots can extend, allowing rain to penetrate into the soil when it actually happens, collecting moisture at the bottom. But there's other ways that you can accomplish the same thing and get the same result with whatever it is that you have. Some of it might be just smaller openings that give you more shading. One of the other options I also think about, instead of harvesting all the way down to the ground, is leaving stumps that are a couple of feet tall that are going to provide shade for you, a place for you to put your seedlings, the shelter behind. Whatever it is, the limitations that you have, the tools that you have at your disposal, use those things to accomplish what it is we're looking for. But you're not just addressing competing vegetation, you're also addressing soil moisture, wanting to make the most of that for your seedling available. And of course, managing vapor pressure deficit, especially for your Douglas fir. That is absolutely critical. And of course, once again, a huge part of being successful in getting that whole positive feedback loop going and the full performance of your tree happening is fertilizing at the time of planting, because seedlings are limited to the plug, and these are difficult sites to get access to nutrient and moisture from. You want to give that seedling everything it has at the very beginning so that it can reach its full potential. Last but not least, something that I haven't gone over or mentioned much in the video is timing of your planting. Thinking again about moisture deficit, when soil moisture is available, when the vapor pressure deficits are low enough. You want to be thinking as early as possible in the spring on these types of sites. There might be the odd year that you could pull off a fall plant, but that's very difficult to do because things tend to dry out so badly in these sites in the fall. But planting timing is also critical. So at any rate, if you have any questions, please leave me a comment in the comments section below this video, and please give me any feedback that you may have. Thanks again for watching. Appreciate your time.